Not on. How's this? Can you hear me now? You have to love technology and the future of it. All right, how's that? Whoa. All right. Sounds good. Well, I appreciate the introduction. Again, Phil Bowman, work with Forage Genetics. My background is dairy nutrition. So are there any dairy nutritionists in the audience? Perfect, so that I can say anything I need to and nobody's gonna disagree with me. My seed counterparts tell me us nutritionists are kind of a pain in the butt because we can never agree on anything. We have all these different quality metrics and so on and so forth. How's that? Okay. So with that, so brought in today to talk about the future of the industry and you know some of the things that we're working on at Forage Genetics. So pretty excited to do that. So let's get started. Forage Genetics. So one of the things, this is a quote from our head of R&D, that we relentlessly pursue the advancement of the forage industry for the past 25 years. That's really true and core to what we are. The past 25 years, we've done everything we can to try to improve the forage industry, and we've really focused on the alfalfa business. So that's kind of our key focus. So our planet today, you know, we face some real challenges. There's lots of things going on from a global standpoint. You know, we have a growing world. You know, in 1980, we had 4.4 billion people. Today, there's around 7 billion. And by 2050, it's, you know, there's projected to be 9.6 plus or minus billion people. So the challenge for all of us in this room is, you know, how do we feed those people? So back in 1965, about 9% of the diets were made of proteins. Now as we go to the future, in 2030, we're looking at about 14% of those diets are going to be proteins. So what's that going to mean? We're going to have to produce more protein across the globe to supply that growing demand. The other thing that's changing is in 1961, it took about an acre to support a person. Well, to meet those demands for the growing world population, it's going to take about 1/3 of an acre to supply nutrition for the population. So we have a lot of things going on. So a couple of things that are also happening in dynamics of the United States are here's a graphic of USDA historical alfalfa acres. And about 2008, we were around 21 million. And it's declined steadily over the course of the last 7, 8, 9, 10 years for a number of different reasons. Corn prices, lower commodity hay prices, a number of different reasons. But this has trended downward. I was searching around USDA seeded acres, more specific to this group. I don't know if you guys agree or disagree with this, but this is what the USDA told me, that historically, the last 4 or 5 years, we've been right around 25,000 seeded acres per year, down a little bit this last year. From a forage genetics perspective, that seems to track on kind of what the nation has done the last couple of years, but we're looking at maybe for a slight increase this year. So there's lots of different things, and we talk about climate change or changing weather patterns and just agriculture in general. You know, the person before me talked about, you know, water issues. You know, depending on where you are in the country, that's definitely a big deal. Unpredictable weather, insect. You know, lots of great presentations on insect and disease problems, weed pressure, new crop disease packages, and increasing pressure there, and then planting zone shifts. So, you know, there's a broad range of solutions, and this is one of the things that Forage Genetics I'm proud of. We're working at this in a number of different ways. We produce seed that's considered approved for organic production, right up to seed that's conventional, to seed that's GMO or double stack with traits. So we believe in a wide range of solutions. But so some of the things that we're working on are precision agriculture, plant breeding, biotechnology, microbials, crop production, and stewardship. So it's going to take a number of these different things for all of us as an industry to meet the needs for sustainable agriculture in the future. So let's first talk about some of the things that, this is pretty basic to this group, but some of the things we're working on breeding advancements. And you guys hit upon it, the speakers did earlier today. So the number one thing in our breeding program that we're working on, especially from a genetic standpoint, is we're breeding for yield. Yield is a driver in most, any economic analysis of any crop. So yield potential is definitely going to be important. Improved persistence. This is whether it's pest resistance, winter hardiness, persistence per se. It's really important when you plant a stand of alfalfa that it's not a 1 year and done, 2 years and done. We want these stands to last 3, 4, 5, 6 years across a wide variety of conditions, stresses, and so on and so forth, so we can have the best economical return possible. And then finally, improving forage quality. So as a dairy nutritionist, I look back at some of the biggest challenges I had on the dairies I worked with, and forage quality was almost always the single number one issue. You cannot make up for poor forage quality in a dairy diet or even in a cattle diet. It is really tough to make up for that. So things like over the years we've worked on things like the multi-leaf trait, improved disease resistance packages, and then also altering the chemical composition of that plant to make that plant more beneficial for the animal. And this is just an example. One of the things with alfalfa is if you're going to be in the alfalfa business and have a credible program, you got to have research locations that are across the country, and I can show the same thing for the world, but really where the alfalfa is growing. So you make sure you're developing varieties and genetics that fit all the challenges that we come across. So let's talk about biotechnology. And one of the things I forgot to mention early on in the presentation, feel free to stop me and ask questions. If you haven't picked up by now, the less I talk, the smarter I sound. So if you guys have questions, I'd like to hear your questions versus me talking. But biotechnology. So one of the things is biotechnology is kind of a buzzword or can be used. But one of the things you got to keep in mind with biotechnology is it's not simple and it's not cheap. So McDougall a few years ago published a study on what it costs to bring a biotechnology trait to the marketplace. This is whether it's in corn or soybeans or cotton, sugar beets or alfalfa. And on average, it cost $136 million. It took about 13 years from the time of initiation to when it could be brought to marketplace. So if one of you has a really great idea in the audience here, and you can wait 10 years and you can borrow us $136 million, we can help you do that. But this is an expensive proposition. One of the challenges in alfalfa versus some of the other crops, what's there in 90-some million acres of corn, and going back to that prior slide, there's only a couple million acres of alfalfa seeded annually. So biotechnology, and because of this cost, there's only certain things that fit alfalfa versus corn or beans where it's a much greater crop, a bigger crop across the world. That make sense? So, much of what we've been talking about today in earlier graphics and presentations is in alfalfa, we've all faced this yield versus quality trade-off. So as everybody said earlier, timing is the most critical part to the quality of that alfalfa. So if you harvest early, you maximize your quality, but you sacrifice yield. If you harvest later, you have more yield, but you sacrifice your quality. Okay, so this is stuff you guys have been doing for generations. I'm 5th generation on my home farm. My grandpa harvested twice a year. My dad, when he first started farming, was 3 times a year. This was in Wisconsin. And then towards the end, it was 4 times a year. I can assure you, we didn't harvest 4 times a year because my brothers and I like going across that land one more time a year. It's because we needed higher quality forage to meet the needs of our dairy diets so we could get the production we wanted. That is the biggest reason why we went across that land. We got less yield because we stressed those stands. We didn't wait till when it had optimum yield, but we needed it to optimize the production of our dairy cattle. Okay, so this is the challenge. This is the things you guys all do on every year when you decide to cut. So with that, one of the newest things that's been in the marketplace the last 2 years is the HarvExtra alfalfa trait. So before I get into it, who has heard of HarvExtra? Has anybody planted it? Okay, we'll have to work on a few of those hands, but so you're going to all learn about it. So what is HarvExtra? So for those of you guys that haven't heard of it, It is a trait in alfalfa that reduces the lignin content in alfalfa, which is going to give our growers the flexibility to produce higher quality forage or delay harvest to maximize yield potential. So why lignin? So lignin's, there was a graphic earlier with looked like a complicated chemical background of what lignin is. So lignin is a chemical that's in plants, it's in alfalfa that's designed to help that plant stand upright. It's necessary, it's important. Unfortunately, the more lignin content you have in a plant, it lowers the digestibility. So young alfalfa, low lignin content, more mature alfalfa, high lignin content, lower digestibility. So you guys have been managing lignin content for decades based on when you run across it with the mower, okay? What this is, or what this trait is, and it's a trait we've inserted into alfalfa, all we've simply done is we've lowered the lignin content at any given point in time compared to conventional varieties. So, and we haven't shut it off. There's still lignin content in there, and there's the right amount there to do all the agronomic things, but we've just turned it down. And I kind of refer to it as what we've done to the plant is it isn't like a light switch where we've shut it on and off. It's like a rheostat, like a dimmer switch for lights. We've just turned the switch down a little bit, okay? So with that, what does that look like from an R&D standpoint or from a data perspective? This is a graphic measuring lignin content over time, days between cuttings, from day 20 to day 37. This is across 2 years, 4 locations, Wisconsin, Idaho, Iowa, Washington State. And we took a look at HarvExtra in the green, which is the green line, compared to 3 other varieties in the marketplace as checks. And we can, that were known as or at least were being marketed as highly digestible or high, low lignin type products. A cropland or a pioneer variety, a cropland variety, and a high-gest variety marketed by Alpharex. And the thing I want to point out here is first is at every stage of cutting or days of cutting, HarvExtra is significantly lower in lignin content versus anything else in the marketplace. The other thing is it's really consistent across all cutting stages, and this is kind of the beauty of biotechnology. One of the things we've observed by inserting this trait is that gap is consistent no matter the cutting, the location, the state, the temperature, so on and so forth. We're seeing that consistently. The other thing you'll see is the other varieties that are in the marketplace tend to stack upon each other. They tend to kind of fall into the same area. The only thing the biggest difference between quality between them is when you cut it. So what you see is the light gray bar here, the Pioneer, is slightly higher in lignin than the other two. But you got to keep in mind, and somebody asked the question, is there a relationship between fall dormancy and quality? What we've observed in our locations is there is a small difference. The lower the fall dormancy, you tend to see higher quality. Partly you got to think about it. It's slower to regrow, it's slower, quicker or slower to get going versus these others. So in a Forage Super Bowl type contest, the fall dormancy 3s tend to have higher quality than the 4s, than the 5s. The fall dormancy 5s will out yield 4s here, and then the fall dormancy 3s will be at the bottom. So if you look at this fall dormancy 4 and compare it to HarvExtra, we have significantly changed it, or HarvExtra is significantly different than that fall dormancy 4. Right here. So this is not a low lignin. This is not a low lignin. These guys market themselves as a low lignin, and then this is the only. The other thing is, there is no such thing as low lignin. When you see HarvExtra in the marketplace, we would refer to it as reduced lignin, because what is low? It's kind of like, and what is low fat? What is low whatever? It is reduced lignin. So what I would tell the group here is, if you're looking for a reduced lignin alfalfa, there is one choice in the marketplace, and it's HarvExtra. So when you talk to your supplier, if it isn't marked HarvExtra or HVX, is just one of these other things that's marketed as high quality. What's that? Not today. Yep. You will. That was a great question. I should have paid you for that question. What's that? I'll show you. All right. I'll give you the 20 later, okay? Okay, 10. All right. So knowing that we've changed the plant, I mean, we've fundamentally changed the plant. It's gonna, why do we refer to it as the great trait? It's really, as a grower, it's gonna give you two options. If you want higher quality alfalfa, keep your current cutting schedule and go for higher quality. I mean, you guys had some fantastic forage results. I heard the banquet or little banquet at lunch. So if you're happy with, if you want to do better and try to increase your quality to something like that, this is an option. Or you can delay your harvest 7 to 10 days, increase yield potential, and you'll see some graphics here where that might be like 20 or 30% more yield over the life of that stand, without sacrificing quality when compared to your conventional varieties cut 7 or 10 days earlier. Okay, so it really is a paradigm shift. Yeah. So let's take a look at the options, and I think this will kind of walk through what you're asking. So growers, farmers can maintain your normal schedule and achieve higher quality. Oops. And really what we're talking about quality is digestibility. And so what this graphic is we're looking at NDFD, which the higher the better, neutral detergent fiber digestibility. And again, it's those same varieties, but put in a different graphic. And if you harvest at the same time, now this time HarvExtra is on top, we're going to see that 15% advantage versus these other varieties cut the same day. Okay? So this is, if you're typically with these varieties seeing 150 RFQ forage, you might see another 25 or 30 points of RFQ on top of that. So maybe now you're closer to 180. Does that make sense? So that's if you're harvesting for quality. Or you can delay harvest by up to 7 to 10 days. And you could take advantage of what this plant does. So this is a yield curve. And as you guys know, but days between cutting, we're gonna add yield, we're gonna add tonnage per acre up until it reaches about 10% bloom, plus or minus. And we're gonna be able to take advantage of when HarvExtra, the quality is gonna go down over time just like everything else. But when that becomes equivalent to what the others were, let's say 7 days earlier, we're gonna have in this case maybe greater than a 20% forage yield advantage than these other varieties did, or even HarvExtra did that much earlier, okay? So you're gonna have a choice as a grower. Today with alfalfa, it's kind of take it or leave it. You harvest at the optimum time. That might be 26 days, 27 days, 28 days between cuttings. That's kind of your option. So, when we're looking at the data, and we've researched this for decades, we've known that by reducing the days or increasing the days between cuttings, you're gonna get more yield. It's not only is it the days, but you're putting less stress on those alfalfa plants. So even though I'm a nutritionist, even I know that alfalfa doesn't want to be cut. Every time you cut it, you stress it, you take away root reserves. So if we're able to increase that time between cuttings, we're going to let it put down root reserves, we're going to have a healthier stand, more persistent stand, and increase tonnage over the life of that stand. So this is some work, this is a slide I stole from Dr. Undersander out of Wisconsin. In 2009, he took a look at 3-cut versus 4-cut systems. In your part of the world, maybe this is a 4-cut versus 5-cut system, but I think it'll apply here pretty well. And what Dan was able to show is that in the second year of a 3-cut system versus a 4-cut system, there was a 17% yield advantage in a 3-cut system. In the third year, there was a 25% advantage. So over the life of the stand and a number of studies, he was able to show consistently a 15 to 20% yield advantage by going to a 3-cut system versus a 4-cut system. Unfortunately, though, in Wisconsin in 2009, sure, he had more tons, but this was beef quality hay. This wasn't dairy quality hay. Now with HarvExtra, this is going to be dairy quality hay, okay? So, and where this shows up is, and this is a picture, I like this picture even though it's from out west, it's one of our research facilities in Touchy, Washington. And each one of these strips are 3 by 16 foot strips, and they're randomly assorted experimentals of HarvExtra, conventional varieties, Roundup varieties. And this is planted in 2011, and this is the spring of 2013. And what do you see here? This half on the right is greener, thriftier than the side on the left. The only difference between each side is how often the other side was cut. the year prior. Okay, so that's interesting. But what's really interesting is when we harvested that stand then, right around the first part of May, this side yielded a ton more than the other side. So we cut it less often, got more tons, and the HarvExtra strips in here, we didn't sacrifice quality. Okay, so this one less cutting over a couple years made a ton difference in a cutting. So HarvExtra doesn't give you more tonnage, but what it does is it allows you to change your management to take advantage of what that plant will do on its own and what it wants to do. That makes sense? Same picture, this is from 2013. In the upper Midwest, we had a real rough winter kill year that year. Same scenario, randomly assorted experimentals. What's the difference here? This side here was cut 4 times the year prior. This side was cut 5 times the year prior. What do you see here? Some winter damage. So that stand here on the right here, and this is, again, this is top-notch fertility, everything's done right. This side here probably needs to be corn, okay? One less cutting, beautiful stand, looks good, ready to go. Let me look here. So this would have been planted in 2011. We would have had one full season, 2012, and this would have been the next season. So basically spring of 2011, so probably 3 cuts and then 4 or 5 the next year. Okay, that's just 1 year. Great question. So what does that mean? From a yield perspective, and this kind of gets to what you were asking there. In the first year, we see about a 15% yield increase by delaying our harvest in tons per acre. The second year, we see about a 30%. In the third year, we're seeing a 40% advantage in the 35-day cut system versus the 28-day. Over the life of that stand, that averages out to about 30%. And again, it's just because we're delaying our cut, allowing that plant to be healthier, less stress, and we're taking advantage of what it wants to do. Okay, so it seems counterintuitive. Our whole lives we've been cutting more often, more frequently. To cut less often, to get more tonnage without sacrificing quality, that's pretty cool. Okay, that's a game changer. And this is, again, that data, there's a couple years of that. We've mimicked that across the country, and we're seeing consistently. The other thing that I'd like to always point out is, so we launched this in 2015, so we've had experience in 2015. We had about 10 growers across the country. 2016, we had maybe 100 or 200 growers. 2017, we had thousands of growers, hundreds of thousands of acres across the country, from Georgia to Washington to California to New York and Vermont. This whole concept of a flexible cutting window. So who here has had hay rained on before? Is anybody? Okay. Anybody here have a breakdown ever? You ever have your help not show up on time? You know, maybe it's your hired helper, maybe it's your own kids. I mean, dad used to complain about my brothers and I. So today, it's day 28. It's time to cut. And there's 5 days of rain in the forecast. Even though the weather guy is accurate, he's going to say there's 5 days of rain. What do? Do you cut it and let it get rained on for 5 days? Or do you let it mature in the field for 5 days? Either way, the options aren't great. Now with HarvExtra, you have, if that's that day 28, you have a week to 10-day window where you can harvest dairy quality hay, top-notch quality hay, to work around that weather event, to work around that breakdown, to work around a high school graduation, to work around whatever, okay? The other thing is depending on where you're at in the country, if you reduce or you increase the time between cuttings by a week or 10 days, you're gonna have the possibility in this part of the world probably to go from a 5-cut system to a 4-cut system. So you're gonna eliminate one full cutting, and that's, as you guys know, it's wear and tear on the equipment, it's diesel fuel, it's your time. So you're gonna gain a week of your life back to maybe do something, or do something else that you're not putting up hay that summer. Where I live, we're typically a 4-cut system. We envision people going to a 3-cut system. But this flexibility is really cool. And you have choices between crops. So let's say, early on in the year you want to get that quality into the bunker, or into the bag, or into the bale. Keep your tight schedule, harvest for higher quality. You can also choose to delay harvest later in the year to work around things. Now you might not be able to skip a cutting, but you have some flexibility where you can make choices. Or if you're a custom hay guy where you're selling hay and there's a market for premium hay, well then harvest for quality. If that market goes south and there's no market there, well then harvest for tons. Save some money on expenses and so on and so forth. It's a great question. That's usually one of the top 1 or 2 questions we get. So this is the beauty of biotechnology. We've had no increased incidence of lodging, just none. That being said, all alfalfa will lodge. You get out there day 30, you get 40-mile-an-hour rain, 2 inches of rain, it will lodge. I've been to our research facility. The whole thing's flat. Conventional, Roundup, lodging tolerant, and HarvExtra. But HarvExtra is no different than anything else. The other thing I'm always asked is there any yield drag? What we'd say is the yield is no better or no worse than conventional varieties that are in marketplace. We just haven't impacted that. And as we look to the future, the yields will continue to improve just like every other variety. So how many of you guys are familiar with BMR corn silage? So it's got 2 knocks against it. It tends to have a yield drag, tends to tip over. Well, the difference is that with that product, it's a mutant event where that gene is knocked out altogether. Well, remember where I said we just turned it down? We've just turned it down. So we've been able to avoid any of the negative agronomic characteristics that could be associated with like a BMR corn silage. Great question. So one of the things that's important to us is data. So if you don't believe me, I can appreciate that. So let's take a look at some of the university data. So back in 2015, this is a summary of that. There were 6 universities that planted HarvExtra and some other varieties across the country. It's a 2-year study. This is from California to Kansas to Michigan to Ohio to Pennsylvania to Wisconsin. They looked at a couple different varieties across the country. In addition, they also, in 2 of the locations, they looked at the HiGest 360. So I only have a couple slides of the data, but point being is they took a look at it just like I've showed you internally. And what did they see? HarvExtra from a quality standpoint, from an ADL had lower ADL. From NDF, digestibility had a higher digestibility. Across cuttings, across days, across locations, it consistently showed that gap and improvement over everything else in the marketplace. And so cutting, and this is a study that's online, but I'll cut to the chase. This is what the summary of those 6 university studies told us. These are their words. HarvExtra maintained lower lignin content than conventionally developed varieties. Consistently higher nutritive value when harvested on a normal harvest schedule. Maintain a high nutritive value for up to 10 days longer than conventional varieties, and produce greater yields when we delayed that up to 10 days longer. Okay, so universities basically mirrored our own data. So the other thing, so it's well and good that we've done this, that the universities have done this. What have actual growers told us? So one of the things we did very early on in 2015 is we put some seed aside to track on farm. So what we did is we found 10 dairies across the upper Midwest and then into the east, where we asked them to plant some HarvExtra alfalfa and just track what's going on from when you harvest to when you feed it to production and so on and so forth. Wide variety of size dairies, less than 200 cows, greater than 2,000 cows, wide variety of diets. We asked them, just put HarvExtra in your diet, take it out, or go from conventional, go to HarvExtra, and then take it out and see what happens. So one of the things that was really interesting with this trial, first of all, it's a lot of work tracking 20 dairies. That's one of the key things we learned. It's a heck of a lot of work keeping that going. But one of the things is we had very specific protocols for these dairies that we wanted you to harvest every 28 days. Well, guess what happened? In 40% of the cases, Mother Nature got in their way, and they couldn't harvest when they wanted to. So they became not high quality demonstrations, they became delayed cut demonstrations like overnight. Okay, so that's Mother Nature. And all these dairies, when we went into this, they said, oh yeah, we harvest every crop at every 28 days. 40% of them couldn't harvest when they wanted to. So with that, we tracked these herds, and this is some of the results of milk production we saw from the ones that were able to harvest what they considered normally. And they're high production herds, right around 100 pounds of milk. And as you can see here, the energy-corrected milk response ranged anywhere from basically none to up to 10 pounds with an average of 4 pounds. But for me as a nutritionist, I think what's really important is these are a variety of different types of dairies, a variety of different diets. And we saw really good to excellent responses in almost all of them. And on the average, it was even better than what we would expected based on how much alfalfa they were feeding. So one of the things that the dairymen said to us and what we can confidently tell you is this stuff is feeding like it's supposed to. So we've changed the lignin content, therefore improved the digestibility. And when those animals are eating it, it's acting like it's supposed to. Now, one thing to keep in mind with high quality alfalfa is you don't always get better milk production. Sometimes you get to save money on your ration input. You know, you save on bean meal, you save on other commodities, which is a good thing, especially today. But one of the other things with high quality forage, the other benefit you might get is sometimes you're able to feed more forage, which is usually a good thing. So high quality forage, forget HarvExtra or whatever, high quality alfalfa, high quality corn silage, usually allows the cows to either eat more forage, save money on diet, or possibly produce more milk. So high quality forage is pretty critical. HarvExtra can give you more high quality forage on your farm. So the next week we took a look at the delayed harvest and we said, all right, well, what happened? Delayed the harvest 7 to 10 days. Some of these went out as far as 40 days. What happened? Well, we weren't able to measure the tonnage. So in this case, you'll have to assume they got that tonnage gain. But most of them told us the windrows were there. They figured they got the tonnage gain. But as you can see here, we went anywhere from, we lost a little bit of milk to some gained a little bit with an average of a slight gain in milk production. So what this tells us is you can wait a week or 10 days, cut later, get more tonnage, and not sacrifice milk production, not sacrifice quality. It performed like their conventional varieties were prior. That makes sense? So, so we talked about our internal data, university data, some grower experiences. So what's that mean in dollars? So, okay, I mean, really when it gets down to it, you know, growing up on a farm, it's really about, so if I'm gonna spend some money, what's it worth to me? So, you know, you have to excuse me, this is a little bit designed for Wisconsin, Minnesota, but I think you guys can make the jump to your location. But let's say, you know, what's the value of delaying your harvest and going after fewer cuttings? So let's say we're going from a 3 versus 4 to a 3 cutting system versus 4. In this part of the world, you might go to a 4 from a 5. As I talk to folks across the country, I hear a wide range of what it costs to harvest one cutting, anywhere from 30 to 70, and I get all sorts of answers. Well, depends if your equipment's paid off or whatnot. But just keeping math round, let's say $50 an acre to harvest over a 4-year life of your stand. You get 3 acres in a bag at that 16 or so pound seeding rate. There's $600 worth of savings in that bag of alfalfa just from harvest costs. Okay? That's wear and tear, diesel, your time, so on and so forth. Let's say you improve the yield just by 10%. Now I had data that showed 20 and 30%. Let's just keep it conservative and show 10%. 5 tons a year, if that's, you know, a pretty conservative amount. So if you get a 10% advantage, that's about a half ton more alfalfa per year you'll have. At $150 a ton, 4 years in the crop, 3 acres in the bag, that's $900 of the value. Okay? Now, one of the things I didn't share with you up to this point, and I'll get into it in a little bit, is it is stacked with the Roundup Ready technology. You'd asked the question. We're going to have some value there, and I'll talk about Roundup more. We calculate about $500. So we calculate in this scenario conservatively, there's about $2,000 of the value from the technology stacked with Roundup in a bag of HarvExtra. Okay? Makes sense? So one of the things that we've created, and you can go to www.harvextra.com, we actually have a calculator where you can plug in your own numbers, your seeding rate, your yield, the hay market for your location, how long your stand will be in, you know, what kind of quality you have, and then what your cost is. It'll actually spit out your number for your operation. I'd encourage you to do that because one of the things that I'd say about HarvExtra, if things go wrong on the farm and you have bad luck and so on and so forth, let's say you lose the rented land of the neighbor and only are able to capture, you know, the harvest for a couple years, there's still good value in HarvExtra. But if everything goes right, HarvExtra, there's a fantastic value. The other thing with HarvExtra is it rewards good alfalfa growers. The more yield you get today, the more value you will see from HarvExtra. So fertility, all these things that the fantastic speakers talked about before me will help you with HarvExtra. HarvExtra will not fix a fertility problem. If you don't have the pH in the right spot, HarvExtra might not be the thing for you, okay? So fix those other things first, but if you do have them right, HarvExtra can help you. So then ask the question about what might be the value that's perfect. What might be the value from a normal cutting schedule taking advantage of the quality? Well, I saw earlier in one of the presentations, if you assume alfalfa is worth about $1 per RFQ point, if you take a 15% improvement over 150 RFQ alfalfa, that means there's about a $22 premium per ton. Same math, you'll have to trust me in the math, 5 tons per acre, $22 premium, 4-year life of the stand, 3 acres in a bag, there's $1,300 worth of value. You have the value of the Roundup, there's about $1,800 worth of value from that stack trade. Okay? Obviously, if the hay price goes up or something changes or you get more yield, this number goes up. And I must have really liked that slide. But anyhow, this is, again, HarvExtra.com. We have this calculator. Any questions on HarvExtra? Shoot. Okay. So, well, go ahead. So great question. We've actually measured in our lab in an oven, and there is no difference. The only thing is from a practical standpoint, if you do go to delayed cut, you might have a bigger windrow. So you need to account for the bigger windrow, but the plant in and of itself will not dry different. So one other trait of technology, and I just have a couple slides and I'll wrap up. We already talked about it earlier, presenters. With Roundup Ready, the opportunity for higher yield, better quality, more convenient, flexible application, increased savings versus conventional herbicides. Weed control is really important in establishing a stand. It's a fantastic, Roundup Ready alfalfa is a fantastic seed establishment control or tool. These are probably 2 common methods, no weed control versus spray with Roundup. You guys can see the difference. This slide here on the left, or picture on the left, might even yield more than the Roundup Ready, but what do you have there? A bunch of weeds. As a nutritionist, I'm not sure what I feed that to. The other thing to keep in mind with alfalfa is it has a long memory. Anything you do in that first year to stress it, it's gonna take its effect later on in the life of the stand. It's just like raising cattle. When you have that calf that gets pneumonia when it's young, and you nurse it back to life, but it never gets to where it could have been. Your alfalfa stand is the same thing, same way. Don't abuse your alfalfa stand early on in life if you want to optimize its performance. And again, we talked about some other methods. So Roundup on the right, here's some conventional herbicides. Sure, they were better than none, but there was some damage to the alfalfa, and as you can see, it's not as clean of stand. So a couple things in the future that I can talk to, at least as much as I'm allowed to talk to. So the alfalfa genome has been sequenced, fully enabling us to use things like molecular markers and the whole genome selection for enhancing native traits. So we've sequenced this thing, and we're taking a look at the alfalfa genome to see if there's advantages and things we can pull out for native traits. So there's probably the future is gonna look like it's gonna be a combination of things. It's gonna be traditional breeding, gene editing, GE techniques like HarvExtra and Roundup Ready are gonna be used to modify expression of native genes and providing new trait opportunities. A couple of things we're looking at is one we call high tannin alfalfa. Alfalfa is a great protein source, but unfortunately the protein tends to be highly degradable. Well, the thought process is if you increase the tannin level in that alfalfa, more of that alfalfa protein becomes, the protein becomes less degradable, making it more valuable. We're looking at things like delayed flowering for yield improvement, and then other stress, abiotic stress tolerance for drought and salinity. And it's probably not such a big deal here, but out west it's a particular big issue as water is becoming an issue. So in summary, we've made significant changes and advances with traded alfalfa versus conventional. In the last 30 to 40 years, using conventional breeding techniques, We've only improved the alfalfa plant by 2 to 3% from a quality perspective. The graphics I showed you on HarvExtra, we moved it by 15% with one event. Okay, so that's pretty significant. Each new variety is going to have significant improvement over older genetics. So I know you guys love some of the genetics you've been planting for a decade. I'd encourage you to ask your supplier about their newest stuff because that's what's going to have the greatest potential. And you have choices. So from a traded aspect, we broadly license. So there's a number of different suppliers that have access to these traits, these technologies. So ask them about it. Ask them if they have Roundup Ready. Ask them if they have HarvExtra. And I even saw a few out in the hallway had brochures on their tables with these new technologies. So you have choices to access this technology. And with that, I'll answer your questions. What's the question again? Average tons per acre. Yeah, so what I would say, well, that's tough to answer. So HarvExtra is going to, in the same situation as you have on your farm, it's going to yield, HarvExtra traded alfalfa will yield similar or the same as your conventional alfalfa that you're using today, unless you delay the harvest. Then you're going to be able to take advantage of the yield. So back to earlier part of the presentation, that we haven't seen a yield reduction, or it's yielded similar. Now alfalfa across the country really varies on how much it yields. I mean, there's some places a couple ton. Out in California, we can get 10 ton plus pretty easily. Answer your question?
In Kentucky, on our variety test, we tend to get from 5 to 7 tons per acre. Let's say we get 5. We've done some work with HarvExtra the last couple of years. In the same type of thing that he's talking about, when we have one less cut, but we let it grow longer, we get about a ton more per acre over normal. So that's what we've done in Kentucky.
Would you expect the 35-day harvest window to increase the resistance on marginal soils? Or is it enough to be worth it? I expect it to improve it, but is it going to?
Yeah, so I mean, on marginal soils. Well, we know that the less stress you put on a stand, you're going to improve the persistence, and there's lots of things that go into that. Marginal soils gets into a gray area because there's other things besides management that hurt yield. So fertility, drainage, and all that sort of stuff. I'm not sure your cutting management is the biggest factor there. That being said, Roundup Ready works pretty sweet in these marginal soils because it really cleans up the weeds and does a nice job there. But all I can say is HarvExtra will perform no better, no worse than your alfalfas today. By cutting it a little less, you might stand a chance, but I probably wouldn't sell it to you based on that alone. Is that fair?
If the marginal was from a drainage standpoint, I doubt it would make a difference. But if it's larger from other stresses, that healthier plant, better carbohydrates, may help. Chris has a question.
Yep.
What was the cost of bringing this trait to market? Are you allowed to share that?
Well, like I said, the slide there, they've pulled the industry or surveyed industry, and they claim it costs right around 136 million. I really don't know what it cost us, but I do know it was a decade plus work, a lot of university work, a lot of internal work, and frankly, a lot of the cost is associated with getting through the government regulatory. Regulatory, good or bad, does cost money and it costs time. So beyond that, I'll leave the 136 million up there.
So when you think about and you check the price of a bag of seed or a pound, and it's probably $10 to $12 a pound.
Yep.
Then don't think about, oh, I can't afford that. Think about the value if it makes sense to you, and think about what they've invested in. The same as the Roundup Ready technology. And actually, the same with any forage seed that you're buying. Don't think about what you used to pay for it or your granddad paid for it. Think about what the value is to you.
So based on a 5-ton average yield, the cost of HarvExtra is going to run you $5 and some change per ton, half of which is the Roundup cost. So Roundup costs you $250 or so per ton.
Now, we didn't ask Phil to come and do an info commercial. We said new advances. my standpoint, it'd be nice to have some tannin in alfalfa because that would eliminate the chance of low for someone grazing. So there's other side benefits. When they first started to work with the reduced lignin, they were thinking of the high quality, they weren't thinking so much of that delayed cut standpoint, but there's often fringe benefits that come along as you develop new technology. So appreciate Forage Genetics and the work they're putting. Appreciate other companies that are working away as well. They've done a good job of bringing things to market. There's a lot of good research happening in university labs. And as we all know, it doesn't matter how good potential it has, it's whether you can actually bring it to market. So, any last question for Phil before we wrap up?
Has there any been any work done to reduce the load factor?
What's that?
To reduce the toxicity?
I'm not aware of any. We're not doing any work on that today. I mean, like the earlier presenter, 1 year rotation would be great. 2 year would be better. I mean, one of the things I think we can also turn that into a benefit of alfalfa is take advantage of those nitrogen credits in that year or two between crops. I mean, there's some value there as your rotation. There's weed control issues and things like that I think it can help you with. But it's a long answer to know.
There's been some breeding work over time, but it never seemed like there was much success. So I don't know of any active work on that. So unless somebody's doing some secret work in the lab someplace, if you hear about this variety, you can plant right into it, like I mentioned earlier with some of the round breeding types. That's not true. But call us because there's maybe somebody has some great discovery, but I'm not holding my breath on that one. One last question here.
Who's licensed the technology? In other words, I want it. What companies have it?
Yeah, so Forage Genetics has broadly licensed the technology. So those who have had access to Roundup will either have or have access to the Roundup trait. So I'll go down a list. I hope I'm not forgetting anybody. So we'll kind of go alphabetical in the best of my mind. So America's Alfalfa, Cropland Alfalfa, WL, all the Monsanto brands, the Pioneer brands, Legend, Rank, Allied Seed, FSG, Lacrosse Seed, Rank Seed, all the major players for the most part that are the ones that are serious in alfalfa. What's that? No, no. Yeah, and the seed business gets complicated because some of them might access it through another brand. So
If they have Roundup ready technology, there's a pretty good chance they have it already.
yeah. So some of this gets complicated. So I can share stuff that's on the web. There's stuff I can't share if it's not on the web. So. Great question though.
Great presentation.